Hey, what's going on, champs? I'm Raeland Mendoza. Welcome to an Immigrant's Life podcast, my podcast about immigrants and immigration and everything in between. Thank you for listening and downloading the show, and thank you for supporting my dad.
Welcome back, Immigrant Nation. Another week, another new episode. As you notice, I changed up the opening because, I'm a wild man. I like changing up stuff. But what I'm not going to change ever is my thankfulness to your support. Thank you for joining me every week, whenever and wherever you are listening to this podcast. I am grateful for your support and I appreciate you so much. And if you have not officially joined the Immigrant Nation, I suggest for you to please click the subscribe button wherever you are listening to this podcast. Another way to be part of this community is by visiting and following our social media accounts. Our handle is @AnImmigrant'sLife. There you can see pictures, audio reels, and other things that I, consider cool. It is also there where you can contact me if you or someone you know wants to be a guest on the podcast, or you can send an email to animmigrant'slife@yahoo.com. So let's connect and tell your beautiful story. All the reminders are done. Now, you know what time it is. We're going to talk about the episode, right? Fashion has the potential to be influential in raising consciousness and creating an impact. Our guest this week is epitomizing the act of being a positive role model and championing profound change by ensuring their style choices are in line with a sense of purpose and community accountability. Please enjoy this easygoing, light conversation, and I hope you take something away from it, because I really did. So let's not waste more time. Without further ado, let's get into the show. Isa, dalawa, tatlo. Today's guest is a designer and a marketer. He's the Filipino Virgil Abloh. Everyone, please welcome Raeland Mendoza.
Yo, thank you. Thank you for having me, man. I'm really excited to be here. Very high standard in regard to live up to Virgil Abloh, but I'm doing my best.
That's what we're trying to do, right?
That's all we're trying to do. That's all we're trying to get by.
By the way, thank you for coming on the podcast, my man. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me, man. I'm very grateful for this opportunity.
Of course, man. I just want to talk smack and, some fashion, whatever else,
Of course.
But before we get into that, why don't you tell the Immigrant Nation where they can reach you, or if you want to promote anything?
Yeah. So first up, my name is Raeland Mendoza, Ray for short. I am the creative director and co-founder of the art collective and lifestyle brand I'll Call You Tomorrow, as well as the creative agency Tomorrow Works, amongst kind of a bunch of different projects all over the place. They can find me, usually the best way is Instagram. I'll Call You Tomorrow is the brand. And then my personal one is just Raeland Mendoza, which Raeland, Raeland, no Y.
Excellent. Raeland, very distinctly Filipino.
Very, right?
Where is that? What's the origin of the story, of the name?
Man, honestly, I wish I had like a really fun story for it, but that's just the name that was given to me. My fun origin story of my name is actually related to my middle name, which I feel like is also distinctly like a Filipino thing. So I actually share the same middle name as a very famous Canadian rapper, aka Drake. So that is my middle name.
Really?
Yeah, and
Wow.
I don't normally talk about it in work interviews, but yeah, my middle name is Drake. My mom got it from like a soap opera that she used to watch a lot when she was pregnant with me, and then it also just kind of like it worked out really well because I spent a lot of time in Toronto growing up as a kid.
Yeah.
So nice little kind of like overlap down there.
That's beautiful. But because you know how Filipinos are, usually what they do is they mix the name of the dad and the mom. So I was kind of expecting that would be the story.
So they did that for my sister, but they didn't do that for me. But then I don't honestly, it's like Filipino people, we're just dramatic, right? So it's kind of like it was given to me, and I've just like, yeah, rode with it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's why when I saw your name, I'm like, I love his name because it's so distinctly Filipino. And I used to have this like relationship with Filipino names with, that's, that's so Filipino, like, come on, man,
Hmm.
do something better. But now I have come to my, part of my life, like, you know what, dude, that is pretty cool because it's very
Oh, hell yeah.
Filipino.
Yeah, definitely like me growing up as a kid. I have like distinct memories of like, you go into those stores and you see like keychains with all of the names in it, and I would never find my name. And then I used to be like, oh, I wish I had like, a standard white name, like, I don't know, Spencer or something.
Mm,
But now these days coming full circle, I'm like, hell yeah, this is my name. Like,
mm.
I don't, it feels like me. And I don't, I don't think I could go like walk around the world with a different name.
Definitely. You said online that your mom, or you said earlier that your mom and your dad was born in Canada?
No, so I'm born in Canada, but my
Okay.
parents are from the Philippines.
Okay.
Um, on some true like immigrant love story though, and I thought
Mm,
like this is always like a fun story for me to tell.
mm,
Um, my dad, when he first immigrated, he touched down in Mississauga, which is just outside of Toronto, for those unfamiliar. He lived there for a couple of years, but then he got a job to come to Edmonton. And then he met my mom on the first day that he was in Edmonton.
wow.
And like that was like, yeah, and that was it. And then they just like started seeing each other, started dating, and and they actually did it right too. So when they got together, they didn't have kids right away. So
Mm.
they got married, and then they just basically like traveled and enjoyed their life, and then they had me. So they're very like my folks are pretty cool.
Are you sure they're Filipinos? Because that's not very Filipino.
It's very like interesting where like my parents, like I feel very connected to my culture despite being
Mm,
born here. And
mhm,
my parents, in my eyes, they're very Filipino, but in some aspects of their life, whether it is like creativity or just like the way that they go about things is very like, yeah, I guess non-traditional.
yeah. You're lucky, man.
I try to be grateful for it, they're cool with
Yeah.
me running around, working in fashion and having a bunch of these tattoos and stuff. So
And they're cool with it?
they're cool with it. They're cool with it. They embrace it.
That's awesome, man. I did some digging on you and I found out that you're from the suburbs of Edmonton, St. Albert
Yes,
specifically.
yes. You did your research, man.
Yeah.
That's a very it's like a suburb just outside to the north of the city, and it's a very interesting kind of space because it's gotten more diverse now, but definitely
Mm,
when I was growing up, it was not diverse like at all, basically.
mm. Were you the only Filipino or person of color in the class or even in the school?
There was, I think in my grade, there was like maybe like one or two other like Filipino kids. And like it got like honestly at its worst, it was like even teachers would mix up me with like other brown kids.
That's
And like,
horrible.
yeah, it's not great, but like I don't know, it was such a unique experience growing up with
Mm,
that, like during the weekdays. And
mm,
then I would spend all my like other out of school time, and all of my friends and all of my cousins were all like on the proper north side of the city.
mm,
And that was like a very diverse neighborhood, very Filipino, very intersecting with like African communities, Latino communities. And I think that comes out a lot in like our approach to our work that these days, where I am so community focused because
mm.
I would constantly go back and forth between these spaces that just like I could not see myself in, and then was just like also trying to find my community and identity in these spaces where I was like essentially like the whitewashed kid, essentially for a while.
Hmm. Were you resentful to your parents that you're living in the suburbs is not the cool place to live in?
I think maybe when I was younger, definitely to an extent, just kind of being like, oh, I desperately just would want to be around like my friends and like the communities that I was starting to build at a young age.
Hmm.
Though as I got kind of older, I really like came to appreciate and learn those opportunities that also like essentially like the privilege that it came with that um coming from where I come from, and that even just stems into like career wise, life wise, the opportunities that definitely afforded me. Yeah, like definitely at one point I was a little resentful, but now it like I've come to accept it. And my parents definitely like they worked their asses off to like get into that neighborhood before it turned into what it turned into, essentially. Um, and yeah, if anything, I do kind of think about the what if of like what my life would look like if I actually was from a different part. But at the same time, maybe I wouldn't have that same drive to like find and build out communities.
Yeah. Isn't that so funny? Like you need that you need that challenges for you to be a better person or a better artist or whatever you're trying to be before other than being like, comfortable.
Totally. It's like it's what makes you, you know, like it's you need to have those core integral experiences to like to not have certain things to really challenge your identity or like really challenge your self concept of how you want to go about the world. Um, and then everything just kind of just builds up on top of that. Like um, I've spent time in a bunch of different cities, whether it's like Toronto, Vancouver, here, and yeah, for some like honestly, it's kind of like it's really ingrained in me that like I really love my city down here, and part of that is because I had to like really fight for like building my circles out here.
Definitely. You were saying that you were going to the north of the city. What were you doing there? Just chilling?
A lot of chilling, a lot of getting into trouble with my cousins and friends. And then I grew up as as all Filipino guys do, out of this triangle. I chose instead of like basketball, breakdancing, and music. I couldn't play any instruments. So I couldn't dance, so I just played basketball. So
Yeah.
I played sports, and I would like instead of playing in the community teams in the neighborhood that I was from, I would play on the north side of the city with all of my cousins, and we would play on these like predominantly Filipino or like POC teams, and it was always like this very interesting experience when we would like go on tournaments or go around the city and find new spaces. And I'm like pulling up with a very diverse crew versus then going to the suburbs on the weekends or during the week.
Yeah. That's funny, man. Yeah, I mean, okay, when you're playing hoop, because for me,
Mhm.
there's two type of Filipinos in
Yes.
Canada.
Yeah,
One
yeah,
is the one that grew up here, like you were born
yeah.
here, and the ones that was born over there and just
Yeah.
plays like, I hate the game. Like you stare at them, they'll call foul.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
How do you handle that?
Okay, so for me personally, because we had like I was basically raised playing basketball around both of those people. I was definitely the kid that like straight up, I was never really all that good. like like I think my peak basketball career or like I think senior like no junior varsity team and like basically was like the backup point guard. And after that I was like, yo, I'm good. I had my moment. I'm not trying to overstep. Um and like it was always fun to see the cultural differences of just seeing like even how rowdy kids would play. Like, you go up to the ball and they slip in the elbow, like you just hear it, like you just like feel it in your side. But it was like for me, it was always really interesting. I actually got into basketball because a big reason of it was actually like the culture around it, like the subculture, so like music, fashion, the way other teams would like style their jerseys, would like communicate kind of like maybe like what they're into, what music they're listening to, or maybe like what part of the city they were from. So like I was really fascinated by that, and sport was like a really cool way for me to engage with like subculture for the first time.
You said that you were connected to the culture with Filipino culture. Was there a time in your life that you didn't want to be associated with Filipinos?
Definitely, I think it's like especially as like a second gen person, like, the stigmas of like, yo, I don't want to look fob. I don't want to like, do all that kind of shit.
Mm,
Or like, oh, is like my accent coming out, or I don't have an accent, blah, blah, like being proud of that.
mm,
It's definitely, it was part of it. Definitely when I was younger, though I'm at a point in my life where, especially because I've been back to the Philippines and like, I'm even like working on like, I'm like professionally trying to figure out like what my creativity and my output looks like in the Philippines. And,
mm,
like where I'm very fortunate to be able to like still have access to like my culture geographically as well as like here in Canada and in terms of the people I'm around.
mhm.
It's I was definitely like it's part of every like second gen person's I think journey, like to be a little ashamed or at least figure out their own relationship with it. But these days I've come to the point in my life where I'm definitely proud of it. And if anything, I'm really interested by this like element and challenge of like figuring out how much or like what parts of the Filipino culture and identity I want to like carry forward for the rest of my life. Or,
Mhm,
if I am to have kids or a family or something like that, what am I passing down and all
mhm.
that kind of things? And how am I kind of continuing this legacy of like whatever it means to be Filipino?
Yeah, I love that. You mentioned that you visited the Philippines. Do you know where your families came from? Your mom and dad?
Hmm. My mom is from Sampaloc,
Oh.
and then my dad is in like Quezon, in like somewhere up in the provincia kind of
Yeah,
thing.
yeah.
Yeah,
We're, I'm from Rizal,
mhm.
so it's like
Where
about two provinces
mhm.
over.
Sick, sick.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. It's been a while since I've been back just because of like COVID and the pandemic and
Yeah.
everything. But it's definitely like up at the top of my list that I need to like touch back to the motherland like within the next like year or so.
Do you enjoy it when coming back home? Like, what do you do? Do you have friends?
These I've only actually like I've have friends now, but that's kind of like a new thing.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, it is always it's a fun time. It's always kind of like I'm sure other people had this experience when you're like me as someone that's born there, when you're going like to the Philippines, going back to whatever motherland you came from, on the plane, you're like, yo, I feel so in tune with my culture. I'm like so Filipino. And then like the minute that like the door opens and then you see all the people and all the noise and like all the smells and like everything come at you and you're like, yo, like I'm not like at all, right? So it's
A
always that
hundred
nice
percent.
kind of like it's that challenge, right? So I really like that aspect of it. And no, if anything, I'm really excited to like hopefully touch back sometime soon and just
Yeah.
even just see what my adult life kind of looks like there and what that kind of chemistry kind of looks like.
Yeah, for sure. Especially the way you act, you're not Filipinos
No,
does
no,
the way you move, the way you talk. Like,
totally.
of
Like I
course,
know.
the culture is improving now. Especially the hip hop culture, there are
Mhm.
more guys that are move like that. But I can
Yeah,
guarantee you, I was born. I was born there. I grew up
for
there.
sure, for sure.
I see you. I'm like, this boy is not from here.
Like don't get it twisted. I know that I'm when I'm walking down the street, like I'm not blending in. Like if I'm especially if I'm wearing like t-shirt and shorts and stuff, like I have a bunch of tattoos and stuff. I
Yeah.
gotta know like piercings and stuff. And like even I'm not a big dude whatsoever, but I am, I guess, quote unquote taller for a Filipino. Like even I'm taller than most of my cousins and stuff,
What's
some of
your
them
height?
at least. So I'm not even that big. I'm like 5'7", 5'8". I'm
Okay,
like
okay,
like
not bad.
I not even then I'm still like a good head taller than my dad. So I'm like, yo, I squeezed out my genetic pool as much as I can.
Hey, that's
I used,
what.
I used to hope I used to hope and like fingers crossed I could make it up to like six, but not happening.
Same, same. I was like, I just want to hit at least 6'1". Thankfully,
Hmm.
I hit 5'10".
Yo, hey, man, that's pretty good. Like for us, man, people that look like us, that's certified like tall Asian status, I would say.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. You, is talking about being connected to culture. I also found out that you came from a lineage of immigrant textile artisans.
Hmm. Yeah, man. So my mom is now a retired jeweler. So she worked in jewelry for a long time. Um, Doing that, my Lolo and Lola were all connected within like the garment industry. So whether it was like pattern making, working as seamstresses, working in as a tailor, that basically runs all the way throughout my family,
Mhm.
and it's this really cool passing of the torch. Is kind of how I kind of see it as like now me and my sister we both work in the fashion industry and like these very like modern kind of conceptions of like
Mm.
like I don't know when my folks kind of ask what I do and I'm like oh yeah it's like design and marketing basically but like but it's pretty cool. It's pretty cool. So I never really, because of that though, I never really had that like, I mean, to an extent a little bit, but like my parents always kind of knew I was going to go into fashion. Like from a early age, that was kind of all I've ever been passionate about.
Mm. Yeah.
Um, but their thing was like, if you're going to do this, you have to take it seriously.
Mm.
And you like, that's kind of where the traditionalism comes in, where they're like, you have to like, this is a craft and a trade, and a lot of people don't get to pursue their passions. So you need to be like essentially the best.
Yeah, well, there's no other excuse but being the number
Yeah, yeah.
one. If you're number
Right?
two,
Like
you're a
there's
loser.
yeah, right? There's no other number. It's one and only.
100%. You mentioned that mom works as a jeweler. How about dad? What did he do?
So my dad, he worked for a long time in like the oil industry,
Okay.
Alberta, which makes sense.
Hmm.
But he worked a lot in the IT side of things. So like
Okay.
on the technology and all that kind of stuff.
Hmm.
He's kind of the only one that didn't really like wasn't in the fashion or garment industry, which is kind of nice because it's a nice kind of like objective kind of point of view. And he's also just like a really silly dude. Like he's a funny guy. So him and I have a lot of really like fun conversations, or he has a lot of like he observes even like my family talk a lot about fashion, and he's like, guys, it doesn't matter. Like it's just a hat.
That's funny. Speaking of family, I mean, not fashion, but like textile industry. My
Mhm.
grandma she was a seamstress. Like she,
Totally.
for a few years, she used to have a few people working for her that were making, duster.
Of course.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
And it says she make
I feel
those.
like it's such a that's such a universal thing, whether like not even in Filipino culture, but like across immigrant cultures, like
Mhm.
having like that is kind of an older generation. Like someone had to be like making the things that we wear, and like
Mhm.
that's definitely been kind of ingrained in me, like with the intentionality of that, you
Mhm.
know.
100%. I'll call you tomorrow. Let's talk about it. Why is
Yes,
it called
yes.
I'll call you tomorrow, first of all?
The really simple answer is I really liked how it looked written on paper. Um,
Just like your
but
name,
the
there's no excuse. It's just like.
but the longer version is so um my co-founder he started saying it around some of our parties as like
Mm.
kind of like a working name, and then it kind of just stuck, and then it kind of built into this whole mentality of what we're trying to do, which is essentially just build communities in new spaces where those opportunities don't exist.
Mhm.
And it's like you would meet someone at our parties and just be like, because we originally started to kind of back Zoom. We started first just in nightlife before doing all the fashion stuff and
Mm.
before doing consulting. We actually started in nightlife, and the whole mentality would start from kind of like you would meet someone at our event and actually want to connect and like stay in touch with them at like this given night, whether it was like romantic, platonic, professionally, you're just meeting good people,
Mm.
and you genuinely would be like, oh yeah, I'll call you tomorrow. And then that was the start of what would become ICYT for short, which is now like kind of its own moving machine. And we have a hand in a bunch of different stuff these days.
That's amazing. So, do you guys make the clothing, or do you work with uh, artists that makes clothing?
A little bit of both. So it really depends on the type of collab or project that we're doing. But a good amount of it comes from like the factories that I handpick and like essentially like, because it is just streetwear, right? Like it's a lot of hats, t-shirts, hoodies, pants, everything. Like, and when it comes to full apparel, so a lot of that, like at the scale I need it to be, has to come out from a factory. Um,
Mm,
that being said, we do get to do these like really cool, unique, more smaller scale collaborations a lot of the times, where we can work with like handmade artisans, whether it's like home goods or limited apparel pieces or stuff like that, where it is like quite literally like one of three or something like that, or handmade incense that is like hand rolled and stuff like that.
mm,
So the cool thing about I'll Call You Tomorrow now is that we're at a place that it lets us engage with things kind of across the spectrum.
mm,
So everything from dropping, a couple hundred units at a time to something really, really intentional and just like really special to us.
mm. That's amazing. Do you remember the moment when you said that I'm gonna be into fashion and that's what I'm gonna do for the rest of my life?
Oh man, I don't know if there was even just like the wild thing is I don't even know if there was a moment for me because that's basically been my whole life. Like
Mm,
I don't remember a time before that I wasn't into this stuff or like, and it's not even just fashion, but it's like the culture and the subculture all around it, right? Like, because fashion in itself is always an expression or is inspired or at least is informed by, music, fashion, or sorry, music, art, or, like different publications or just media or the whatever the current zeitgeist or like the cultural temperature is at subculture as a whole, I've just been like obsessed about. And then
mm,
fashion became kind of just like what I knew how to express that through. But it's always been like, for me, it first started out being in like, oh, I want to work in marketing, maybe advertising around fashion. Oh, but I'm also really good at like branding and strategy or like some like retail and stuff like that. And then that also then kind of spun into like design and products and textiles and essentially now we get to like put that all together into this like really cool formula.
mm. That's amazing. I know with small companies and handmade and whatnot, the price are a little bit high, steep.
Mhm.
How can you compete with bigger brand that has first of all they are famous already, second of all they
Mhm.
have cheaper prices.
I think for me, whenever I'm faced with questions like that, it really then just comes, it's like a marketing question, really, where it's what is as a brand, what are you offering to your specific target demographic that by buying into your product, they're accessing something that's more unique compared to something of a larger brand, insert a Nike, insert a whatever.
Yeah.
Just because like by nature that like conceptual offering has to be more unique and more something a little bit more nuanced compared to like a big box retailer. And that's why honestly these days like I'm not really all that concerned in terms of like my stuff is literally on the shelf with like bigger brands at the store, but I know that if I'm doing a good job and my marketing is on point and I'm talking to who I need to talk to in the right meaningful way, that stuff won't necessarily matter.
Amazing. And also quality, you know?
Totally, totally. But that's the tricky part though, man, is quality is such a subjective and like almost like it can be like defined in so many different ways, right? Like quality can be how you feel it. Is it too heavy? Is it too light? Is it breathable? Or is it, does it do this? Does it do that? Or does it also stand for something else, which is like the brand in itself, right? Like the image in people's minds. We all think that we all know that if we're playing basketball, if I put Nike shoes on, I feel faster when I wear Adidas, right? But why, right? Because of the brand, because you feel stronger, and so it's
Yeah.
like a lot of the marketing and brand work I do, whether it's for I'll Call You Tomorrow or for on the agency side with Tomorrow Works, is how do you build the right feelings around that brand and around that idea.
Mm. What's your opinion about people trying to move away from fast fashion?
I think it's a good thing. Like to be honest, I mean like fast fashion as a whole, it's hard for me in a very privileged place to be like, oh, it's all bad kind of thing,
Mm-hmm.
because it does serve a purpose in the sense of like, what if you're like a family that needs to like just have clothing for multiple kids, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
do so in a very cost efficient way. And we all know everything is getting expensive these days.
Mm-hmm.
I think for me as a business owner and as a designer that does come out with clothing, it's then up to me to ask myself in terms of sustainability, being like, why does this need to actually exist? Technically, the last thing the world needs is another t-shirt. But if can I inject it with as much of that ideas, that are unique to me and my brand and our platform and our people, can I give it so much of that it just needs to exist, and then also then make it in a way that is as responsible as I can like essentially afford as a business owner to
Mm-hmm.
make it happen, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then the whole other side of that argument too is like, oh, if this is the mechanism of like people buying products, which then like allows me and my team and my friends to be creative and express themselves through art, then essentially, that in itself is a reason to exist.
Mm-hmm.
But
Definitely.
to go back to your question though, on like fast fashion, I think the irresponsible part is when if the consumers can't afford to buy luxury goods and engage with the market with higher price points and have just like discretionary income, they need to be looking at, why am I buying the things that I'm buying, and also like, why am I constantly just like feeling the need to consume all the time, right?
Yeah. That's the
Which is
key.
then that's the hard part.
Yeah, that's the hard part is like, the addiction of shopping.
Totally. And it's just our society, right? Like, honestly, it's the addiction to consuming everything, like
Mm-hmm.
whether it's media and all that kind of stuff. And it's also just hard, man. Like I mean, the irony is not lost on me of like me talking about, yo, don't buy too much stuff when I literally have like a collection coming out this month?
That's funny. This is one of the things that people ask me all the time. What is good fashion?
Such a hard question, man. So loaded,
Right?
so loaded.
For you, what is good fashion?
I think for me, or okay, the way I'll approach this question, which is actually a really fun question, but fashion in itself it's all just visual language. So it's communication. So for me, that good fashion is being able to show the world whatever it is that you want to show or communicate about yourself in a whatever way is the most true to you, if that makes sense.
100%.
So, and that can look like a million other things to other different people. And honestly, like I'm pretty pretentious sometimes when it comes to clothing,
Who isn't?
but who isn't, right? And we're like, we like what we like. And that's kind of the whole point of it. And like what I think it could be a really cool fit for someone could think that, yo, that's trash and that's completely like off mark. But if it's the best, like, or I think usually whenever people are like, oh, that person's so well dressed, that looks so good, that's usually because they're so comfortable and it expresses who they are.
I love that. Yes, 100%. You know those people that says, oh, I don't want to dress up because I'm not comfortable. You can be comfortable and look good.
Totally. Then that usually comes down to like, how do we find the right things at the right price point in the right materials that are a good fit your body, that fit your lifestyle, and like can still showcase what you want to showcase, whether that's like your interest, your your context and how you live your life and lifestyle. If you're more professional, more casual, if you are very like formal or business leaning, then like you can still show personality in those constraints and stuff. But yeah, as a whole, I'm a very staunch, like strict believer of like a uniform. So I only really have like one or two outfits and just like multiples of everything. Because I also like, for me, it frees up my mind because I have to think about clothing for like everything else for the rest of my day. So the last thing I want to think about is like what I'm wearing at the beginning of the morning.
Yeah, I heard that from Steve Jobs. He
Hmm.
does the same thing. And what's his name? The Facebook guy, what's his name? Mark Zuckerberg. That's it.
Mark, I'll say I definitely take more style inspo from Steve Jobs, less Zuckerberg.
Yeah, did you? That's is that what you where you heard it from? That's why you tried to emulate
Yeah,
that.
like it was like Steve Jobs, and also just like from around. It's been a principle for a long time.
Mm.
And like it was actually first explained to me. I think I forget who told it to me, but like through like cartoon characters, right?
Mm.
Like if you're watching TV shows on Saturday mornings, your favorite cartoon characters always wear the same thing,
Hmm.
and it's very distinctly them. And when you don't even have to see the character, but if you see, the like whatever, like what is it, the Arthur t-shirt, or like the little I think it's like an orange t-shirt or something.
Yellow.
Um, yellow. So, but if you see it, you're like, oh, that's Arthur, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I guess so. But I like what you're saying about that. I don't have to think because every
Hmm.
morning when I'm preparing, I'm getting ready. Man, of course, this is coming from a privileged standpoint. I have
Totally,
to go through
totally.
the shirts, the jean, the pants, the
Decision
belt,
fatigue,
the
man.
shoes. And
Hmm.
a few years ago, I told myself I will stop buying shoes because I have so much shoes, right? That's not true. I still,
Same, man.
shoes
Yeah,
still
when I
come
like,
in.
yeah. Like I thought, man, when I left Vancouver like about 3 years ago,
Mm.
I think I was like giving away sneakers and clothes at that point because I just had like too much of it. And
Mhm.
I was like, I'm not taking this back with me. And like, especially as, again, this comes from a very privileged standpoint, but like someone that works in the industry, we just have so much shit. And
Mm.
it's hard to even like if you see it all like look like all together, I'm like, this is too much for one person to have. Like,
I know, dude. It's like this just recently, like this past weekend. I was like, okay, I'm done with shoes. Here's the thing. This is justifying my addiction to shoes. I don't really buy shoes. People give me shoes.
hmm hey, I mean,
You can't say
and
no.
who are you to refuse a good gift?
Hey, my Lola said, never say no to free.
Exactly.
You know?
And that's that like immigrant mentality of like, yo, I can always use another pair of shoes. Like, why not? Right?
Yeah, exactly. Well, also it's coming from, not having enough or not
Totally.
having anything at all.
Hmm.
You
Hmm.
know, I have two kids, and these bastards are privileged kids, and they make fun of me every time. Like I don't know about if you do this, but toothpaste when you like pushes it up,
Oh yeah.
that
Well, I mean, that's how I was raised, right? That is the immigrant mentality of like, no, the toothpaste, we're rolling it all the way up, and you got to push it all the way through too, just
hmm.
to make sure that you're like hitting the back of it, so all the way come out.
See, you're missing a step. You have to cut it open,
Yeah, and you cut it
and
and
then
then you scoop it out.
my kids laugh at me all the time. Like, Dad, you're such an immigrant. I said, hell's yeah, I am. You don't
Yeah, you
know.
gotta own it. You gotta own it, and like
Hey,
it's stuff like that too, where it wasn't until I think I was older where I was like, I didn't even realize that was ingrained in me.
hmm.
Where despite I wasn't like, I wasn't born in the Philippines, but I'm still pushing my toothpaste all the way up and like cutting it, or like I'm like, why is all the furniture in my house at one point like wrapped in plastic, right? Or and I just assumed that everyone like lived like that, and it wasn't until I got older where I was like, oh no, okay, I am coming from a really privileged place, being like coming from where I'm coming from.
Mhm.
That being said, though, like there's facets of my life that are like very intersected within like the immigrant experience that
Mhm.
other people have no idea about, you know?
Yeah, 100%. And earlier you said it, that accent. Of course, when I moved here, I was 20 years old, and
Hmm.
like for me, all Canadian sounds the same. Till
Hmm. Hmm.
I practice my hearing to it, and and sometimes I'll hear kids that were born here, but their parents came from, let's say, Philippines, and there's a
Yeah.
word that will come out like,
Mhm.
oh, there's some spice on this one.
Yeah, like so I've been told like I don't know what specific words in my voice that but like sometimes it does come out, you know, and
Mhm.
it definitely was thicker when I was old, like younger, sorry,
Mhm.
like as a kid. Um, but then even it's like as you kind of spend time with it, like the Canadian regional accents will also kind of like trickle in.
Yeah.
And then it's this weird mix of like Tagalog meets like the Toronto kind of like East accent. And
Mhm.
then like spending time in Vancouver is
Mhm.
like the like almost LA Valley girl kind of accent. And then Alberta is like the prairies, right? So it's kind of that like central, almost like hockey slang comes out.
Mhm.
So
That's
it's
amazing.
this whole mix. It's this whole mix.
Nice. You mentioned Toronto. Did you grew up in Toronto or you work in Toronto? What did you do in Toronto?
So like I said, so my dad, when he first immigrated to Canada, he touched down in Mississauga,
Yeah.
and that's like just outside of Toronto. And then all of his family is still out there. So all of his like siblings, his parents were out there. All my cousins on that side were out there. So I would go back to Toronto and Mississauga and like the GTA area, like as a whole, like
Mm.
Brampton, Hamilton, Vaughan, spending time actually in Toronto, like almost every summer slash like multiple times a year, like for extended amounts of time. And Toronto was always in my mind like my second home. Like
Mm.
if anything, Toronto was like my romanticized community that I would look for and try to build when I was a kid here in Edmonton, just because of how diverse it was. I've always been like a city guy, so it's like so high tempo and like something's always kind of happening. Um, and then now we actually, because of I'll Call You Tomorrow and our agency Tomorrow work, we are like always actively like working with different brands in and around Toronto, all over the place. I
Mm.
was just there like last year. I'm working on a couple different projects out there right now, so I'm probably going to be going down there maybe later this fall. So yeah, I'm always kind of in and around. And
Mm.
Toronto's a really special place in my heart for sure.
Mm. Definitely. Is I I'll call you tomorrow. Is there a brick and mortar store that you guys have, or is just more of like online?
So right now it's online for the most part, and our web shop is pretty wild. So we ship anywhere and everywhere. We're based here in Edmonton, but we're shipping stuff all over to Europe and internationally.
Mhm.
But we do a lot of these like really cool pop-ups and different experiences built to our products
Mm.
in like physical spaces. So we actually have one coming up at the end of this month, but we also did like a whole like 2 month residency that I called Lola's Gift Shop.
Mm.
Um, and it was like basically a streetwear boutique in the middle of a farmer's market.
Wow.
And it would be like our clothing sold beside like produce stalls and stuff.
That's awesome.
So we've done that before. And we have like retail stockists, like other stores carry our stuff. And yeah, so like there's always different way avenues for people to get the product.
Mm. Okay. I want to ask you, since you're a very creative man, do you think that creativity involves putting your heart and soul into your work, or is it more like letting your mind flow freely to witness the surprising result of your actions?
Interesting. Um, I mean, I would argue that they're almost kind of the same, right? Like
Mm.
in order to like put your heart and soul into everything, and you have to be free and like let your mind kind of like wander or like essentially play. Like I always kind of approach it as like if I was a little kid, how am I playing with like these action figures and stuff like that? And that's creativity in itself. But you're still putting like your heart and soul in there. Though I really learned going through fashion school was to do it at a very high level, you need to be able to separate your heart and soul from it, where it's like
Mm.
you basically need to have a really thick skin. You put your heart and soul to it, but the minute that it's out there, like it doesn't belong to you anymore. Like it can get critiqued, it can get ripped apart, it can be if it's well received, amazing, but it's not everything you make is going to be well received. Like, or if you work in the creative industry, sorry to break it to people, like not every idea you have is going to be the number one amazing idea, right?
Mhm.
But you need to be able to like just kind of believe it up to a point and then just let it exist in the world and then separate yourself from it.
I love it. Well said. Have you ever been faced with negative feedback, and how do you deal with it?
Oh, all the time. I mean, like, yeah, like I went to fashion school, so like that's literally design critiques and like, you basically submit all your stuff and then they rip it apart just to build you back up again. Or even on a more practical example, like, I'll come out with something and I think it's like so like really dope and like comes out with this like really cool story and a narrative and idea, and we spend all this time and energy and like money on the marketing for it. It comes out and then it just like no one is into it. And you're just like, shit, okay. Well then. But then you just roll with the punches, like half of the battle for me, or probably honestly not over half, like I'd even say like 90% of my like appreciation for what I do is like literally just being able to make my ideas like a reality. So like the minute it's out, that's a success for me. After that, it doesn't matter.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, that's a great approach to things, that you don't have control.
Yeah. And like control in itself is an illusion, right? So
Mhm.
who am I? Like if I can do, I know that I trust myself to do a really good job for everything that I can control
Mhm.
immediately. But like the minute that exceeds my hands and exceeds my team's hands, that's actually just not my problem. So like it's very freeing.
Yeah, I love that approach. Very beautiful. It reminds me of Bob Dylan. He was asked to interpret his songs and what it means, and he pretty much says the same thing. Like, I don't know, dude. I write the thing, and then
Yeah,
whatever happens,
right.
happens.
And like it's the way that you can find a lot of freedom in it, and also what just practically lets me and my friends and our team, just because I work with my best friends,
Mhm.
um, do what we do because we at any given time, we're juggling like 5 to 6 different projects, or like literally in my phone, I have like 3 different time zones at any given time. But like I'm very blessed that I'm not a perfectionist. And I always kind of come back to that. And actually, to go full circle, Virgil Abloh really taught me that on like me learning from his lectures of just like, you only really, at most given time, you only really need to change things like 3 to 5%.
Yeah, I love that. But were you always been like that growing up, or this is just the recent? Uh,
Mm, I think if anything, I've always been like this to an extent. And then after that, it was being really like I used to have a lot of energy or like pent up anxiety after the fact of like after you put it out, will this be well received? What do they think of me? All that kind of stuff. Now it's kind of just like once it's out, it's gone. Like it's out of sight, out of mind for me.
how did you work yourself to that?
I think it just comes with like the maturity and the confidence, honestly. Like once you start working on so many things and you got your repetitions in and you know what you're good at, once it's out there, you're just kind of like you feel comfortable with it. And then like I've gotten what I need to get from it now. Now it's up to everybody else kind of get whatever they want from it.
Yeah, I love that. How are you adding to the representation of the Filipino culture?
Man, heavy questions, bro. It's funny. I do that is something that I do think about. I don't know, just on some like legacy type stuff. So just like hopefully there's in my mind there's like some young kid that probably wants to do what I want to do, or just at least is like a little bit more non-traditional in their upbringing and what they want to get out of their life, and whether it's like professionally or just anything. But is also still very much tied to the Filipino cultural identity and diaspora and like the immigrant experience. And part of like me being able to like use whatever platform I have um, at my disposal, like if they see that and like see that it is like can be done, and I'm like, yo, that's a win in itself, kind of thing. That being said, I'm also just like, hey man, I'm just trying to do me. Like
I love that.
I'm sure in some aspects I'm a good role model, but I'm definitely not a perfect one. That's for sure.
Yeah, it's not your responsibility to be to someone to look upon to.
Yeah, like if anything, it's really, really cool that I'll call you tomorrow specifically. Like we get young kids coming up to us and being like, hey, like we love what you're doing. And, my first experience engaging with a community that exists here is because of you guys. And that's great. And I love it. And I'm really blessed for that. That being said, I also just can't like, there is a little bit of separation there where I'm like, cool, that is maybe a core memory now, but now I can't be personally responsible to then like guide them all the way throughout, which is, usually it's pretty self-apparent kind of thing. But to be even considered in that realm that people look to me or the people I'm around, that is like, it's a cool experience for sure.
But like you said earlier, it's out of your control.
Right. And like people will do with what it is, right? And how they want it.
Yeah. What do you wish to accomplish with I'll Call You Tomorrow?
Oh man, my favorite response to this like question is literally just take over the world. So um the way I approach I'll Call You Tomorrow is I actually see us closer to like a media company versus an actual fashion brand. Or we're basically like a media company with like really good merch, essentially. Because it's just the machine that lets me and my friends express ourselves. And with that mentality, I just want to have a hand in like as many different cultural touch points as I can, like across the board. So whether that's like clothing, nightlife, hospitality, retail, we even dabbled in just like prepackaged food and like having collabs in grocery stores, or like we've done like children's clothing. It's like it's really anything that we are into, like we'll just figure it out and just like make it happen. And now we have this inbuilt platform to engage the community with it.
Wow. You collaborated with food?
Yeah, like on some, it's funny, on some true like Filipino shit. We did a collab ice cream like last summer, I believe. And it was sold at Seafood City in Edmonton, which was like it's fun. My parents they're very supportive of what I do. But it's like I'll be like, oh hey, like this ended up in like GQ, and they're like, oh that's cool. But like me showing them the photo of like the package that I designed of like a cool ice cream in Seafood City in the shelf, they're like, oh yo, that's really cool.
Because for them, GQ, what's GQ to them? You know?
Right? Or just because they know, like, oh, Seafood City, that's like a big deal, right? Like, that's the one that they're taking photos of and like put it on the Facebook group chat.
I love that. Like, oh, Dad, this is GQ. And yeah, cool, whatever. And then
And
Seafood
they're
was
like, oh,
like,
that's cool. And I was like, oh, Seafood City? Like, that's the one that was like, they asked me to, like, oh, let's go to the grocery store and take photos in front of the shelves.
ah, that's cool, man. Yeah, because for them, it's like tangible.
Totally. And there's a touch point of like, oh, we know what this means and we know what this stands, like, in context of like the greater environment.
100%. Do you get hate from other Filipinos?
Maybe, probably, honestly. I'm so tunnel vision these days that it's just like maybe if it comes in, but at the same time, like maybe it's because my Tagalog is bad and like,
Who gives a
whatever, they don't
shit?
like my tattoos. Yeah, like I don't lose sleep over most of that stuff, which is like kind of the way to go about it, just because like it is kind of the double-edged sword of like Filipinos, right? Like we do love to gossip.
I hate that. I hate that. Like, oh yeah, he's not Filipino. He's Canadian. He's not pure. I'm like, what is pure for you? Like he's
Yeah, right.
Filipino. Like especially basketball. Going back to basketball is
hmm
like Jalen Green is a great example, right? Like he's half
hmm
Filipino, but he will not be considered Filipino because he's half only.
Right. Or because he doesn't quite quote unquote like look like the half Filipino that we have in our minds, right? Like
Yeah.
um it is always kind of this like discourse, or even between first and second gen, or people that stayed in the Philippines to fill and all that kind of stuff. It's just stuff for people to fight about. But I mean, in my idealized romantic world, it's kind of just like we are all part of this experience and like basically experiment that is like immigration and like the diaspora as a whole. It's what bonds us together, and we all have more things in common than we do have things in difference, right?
Yep,
We
for
all we
sure.
all eat rice, man. Like it's we all,
Exactly, you know. For your products, I'll call you tomorrow. Have you ever collaborated or maybe planning to collaborate with local artists from the Philippines?
not specifically in I'll call you tomorrow. Um, Not to tease it too much, but I can't talk about it too much
Of
out
course.
here. But I have a few other projects in the works with like other local like a lot of things happening around like Manila, Makati, and like a lot of the creative scene
Awesome.
happening in the Philippines.
Hmm.
Specifically just in like the streetwear and the fashion world. Because
Hmm.
there's a lot of really cool stuff happening in there. Like
Hmm.
really genuinely some of the most talented people I get to come across are literally just like barangay boys that are just like don't know how to use Photoshop, but they can draw like crazy, and the way they put things together is just like so dope. So
Hmm.
like yeah, definitely like you can see it in some of our output, and I worked on a pop up out there actually this past spring.
Mm.
But there's some cool stuff in the work that specifically I want to be able to like express my creativity and like figure out what my community looks like in the Philippines specifically.
That's good.
But yeah, more on that like coming soon, probably like later in the year to like 2024.
Yeah, for sure. It's hard to build a brand. What keeps you going?
And honestly, it's like it's hard to it sounds like a cop out, but not much else. Like, the brand, but like my friends, my family, like I get to like just my lifestyle because I get to work with my best friends and I get to have a lot of freedom in how I go around things. And it's um it's been a wild ride, I'm not gonna lie. And that's what keeps me going and having that appreciation for what I do. And I definitely have a very like high pace. And if you see my inbox and the people that know me know that I basically just like don't sleep. But I truly wouldn't have it any other way.
Congratulations.
Thank you, bro. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Of course, man. I love like when people go for it, and people are trying and people that looks like me,
Right?
and we need we need representation out there.
Totally. Totally. And I should say too, like across my journey, I've been really blessed to have people, not necessarily all the time Filipino, but like people that look close to us or at least have very similar stories help give me moments and give me opportunities and recognize the talent in me and like push me forward, and like that brought me up. And if anything, as I am getting a little bit older, I turned 28 last week or a couple weeks ago. So
You're a youngin.
I know I'm a youth. So but like in my mind I'm getting old, but like as I'm getting old I'm like it is something I'm cognizant of. And when you ask me in terms of like representation,
Hmm.
I've been really blessed to have these like really dope mentors. And if anything, if I can be that for other people, whether it's directly or indirectly, then I'm like, yo, that's my mission is done, right? Like that's all I can ask for.
I love that you mentioned mentor and teaching and whatnot because that's what my next question. Have you thought of creating a class to teach what you do?
And maybe, I don't know, yeah, we should team up on it. It just feels weird. Like I don't like I never, for me personally, I never like to come across like preachy, like
Mhm.
all I can really talk about is my specific and unique experience. I definitely know what I'm talking about in some things, but I'm like, whether it comes to like, let's say like product design or something. But even then, I'm like, I get weird anytime anyone's like, my opinion and is like the authority and is right, right? And or if it feels like that, I get a little weirded out by that. But if anything, like that is something I would love to. I'm interested in exploring in when it comes to just like sharing my story with other people.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, you don't want to sound preachy, but it won't be preachy if you're talking about your life and about your art.
Yeah, that's true, man. That's true. Like if anything, I'm sure there's a world out there that like the Ray class exists. I've yet to just like figure out the full concept around it.
Exactly. I think we're there. But before we close out, I want to ask you one most important question. I reserved
Let's
this
hear
for
it.
last. What advice can you give me to improve my fashion sense?
Okay. Um, I will say invest in the very simple things. So whether it's just like a really high quality like white t-shirt, white button up, make sure like yeah, find whatever that is that fits you the best. And if it means you're only buying that once or twice a year instead of like 6 times a year, even better. And on top of that, it's not only just buying it, but like caring for the product. So whether it's like tailoring, alterations, having like a good steamer, having a good lint roller. I wear a lot of black, so I'm constantly like lint rolling and like taking care of something will show that you're taking care of yourself and like you care about other people, you know? That is just good hygiene, like especially for guys. I feel like I tell like other dudes a lot, be like, yo, cut your nails, you know, take a shower.
Take a shower. I
Yo, go
think that's,
legal, you know?
yeah, you know what I mean? But yeah, I mean, I love what you said there. Definitely. Again, Ray, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. I really, really do appreciate it.
Yo, bro, this was really fun. I will say this has been like some of the more fun questions that I've taken on in the
Oh,
past little bit. It's been really fun, bro.
I appreciate that. I take pride on my questions.
Yeah, I can tell you've done your research. I feel like or if you feel like if you're familiar with Nardwar, if you're he's like the Canadian
Yes, yes,
interviewer,
yes.
it low key feeling like I'm getting interviewed by Nardwar. You're like pulling up all these like receipts and stuff. Crazy.
That's an honor, man. Thank you so much. That means so much. Again, Ray, thank you so much. I really do appreciate it. And have a good evening.
Yo, thank you, bro. Much love, much love.
Bye. Again, Raylan, thank you for coming on the podcast. I really, really do appreciate it. Thank you, listeners, for listening. This is Aaron Deliosa for An Immigrant's Life. I'll see you guys later.